Another episode of Memories of Us. Today we got Mr. Bill with us, and he is a certified grief counselor. We was talking earlier, and this man is very interesting. I'm enjoying our conversation. I'm glad that we started when we did, and I just want to introduce him. Bill, how are you doing today?
Well, great, Tony. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, Tony, I've been actually chatting for about 15 minutes, and I ended up being the interviewer because I'm so interested in you as a person and what you've created. And you're way ahead of me in terms of creation. I don't have a nonprofit. I make my living as a voice actor.
Right. Oh,
And,
wow.
I
Okay.
live in Los Angeles and do cartoon voices and this and that. And but the people might know me as having played Flint on G.I. Joe, the TV cartoon.
That's you.
All right, Lady J, better get your battle gear on because Cobra's on their way, and I can't bring up the weapon system. We got to get out of here.
Oh, that is crazy. That
So,
was my favorite cartoon when I was a child.
that's so great. It's so
Yeah,
great.
and I was just to draw the characters. I'm telling you guys are responsible for some comic books that they never authorized. From
I have a funny story. It took me years. We did about 2 seasons of 26 episodes every year
Mhm.
of GI Joe, and then Transformers as well. And then our union went on strike because of other issues, and the distributor said, "You guys are done. We're going to Canada." So we did no more. There's about 52 episodes out there. About 5 years later, a friend of mine said, "Want to go to a Comic-Con?" And I said, "For what? They're awfully crowded." She said, "We're doing a GI Joe thing." I said, "But that was years ago." She said, "No, no, 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 no. That it was still in syndication. That there were fans out there." And so I went and signed autographs and met fans. And one guy about 40 years old came up to me and grabbed my hand and gave me this big handshake and said, I really want to thank you for teaching me ethics and morality. And I
Yes.
looked over my shoulder and I thought Billy Graham Jr. was standing behind me. And I said, what do you mean, man? And he said, well, I was 9 years old and my parents were divorced and all I had was G.I. Joe. I'd come home after school and watch it every day. And then you'd come on and say, oh, that's right, Bobby, you shouldn't throw baseballs through your neighbor's window. You might hit somebody with a ball. Now you know. And knowing is now you know, and knowing's half the battle. Knowing's half the battle. So so I got into all that because of my dad. My dad was an advertising guy and a nice guy and took me to work and everything. But the reason I think you and I are together, Tony, is because I lost my mother to cancer at 7. My dad remarried, a nice lady, and I had a big brother named Pete who ended up with a kidney disease. Football player, swimmer, baseball player, died at 19 when I was 13, and 3.5 months later, I found my father dead of a heart attack on the floor. And so it was me and my stepmother, who was a very nice lady, but sadly, she had lost her father and found him on the floor of the bathroom, just as I had found mine, but to suicide, her father. But she never told me. Never, ever told me, never shared it. Didn't, and that was something that we could have shared. You and
Right.
I were talking earlier about men sharing grief. We don't. We never, hey man, how's the Dodgers? Oh, you a Dodgers fan? What's wrong with you? And so she and I, she had decided not to share that with me and instead enjoyed Kentucky Tavern bourbon. And but I still, to this day, go in the booth and do, tonight on Channel 2 or whatever it is I'm doing. I'm thinking about my dad. I'm thinking about my brother Pete.
Mhm.
And in my background when I was 12 and 13, and I had a little tiny 5-watt radio station in my bedroom, they were my supporters. And then they were torn away by fate for whatever. There's no reason for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the thing that you and I were just talking about before we went on the air here was, what is that thing? And I think I asked you because not everybody does what you do. Not everybody starts a nonprofit. Not everybody gathers men together and says tells the story. We as a gender are in a bit of a pinch,
We
not
are.
dealing with our emotions, especially when big stuff comes down. and big stuff comes down over and over and over, and life is rough.
It is.
And we don't talk about it. We man up and get loaded and have a good time instead of doing the what some call work and others call the pleasure of sharing what's going on.
Right.
But not everybody does what you're way ahead of me. I haven't started a nonprofit. I am actually doing my first Zoom bibliotherapy grief session, which is a very fancy word for we're going to read some poems, we're going to write some crazy stuff in 90 minutes, and we're going to talk about our feelings. What'd you think of that poem? Reminded me of this and that and this and that. And everything from spoken word to old-fashioned rhyming stuff. But what is it that allowed you to say, I'm going to turn it around. I'm going to start a nonprofit. I'm going to do this. I'm going to reach out. What it is that allowed me to decide to survive instead of just being a drug addict?
Yeah.
What is it that what is that thing that nobody can really tell us to do? We can get hints from a
Right.
preacher or a therapist or a teacher or an aunt or an uncle. We can get hints as to how to turn it around, but nobody can do it for us. And it's like a mystery. I mean, I've written stories about it and poems about it. That thing, that moment when your mind clicks and tells you the truth.
Yeah.
Religious people will say it's a message from God. A humanist person who might say this is what God created, or this is what we've been given. The brain has this incredible power to right itself
Right.
in the worst moments, and that's still a mystery to me. It's still a
Also
mystery.
keeping yourself from being clouded as you're doing it, and everybody's journey is different. Mine was a backwards recognition or backwards journey, and to where everything began to lay itself out. So once I realized what it was, and took that journey backwards in my life, because I had to be truthful with myself, because I wanted to know why am I the way I am, right? Something didn't feel right, and I wanted to explore it. But the only way that I knew how to do that is that I had to start healing. I didn't know why. I've never been taught this, but I just knew that I was supposed to do it. No one could tell me. So once I began that backwards journey in my life, and I became very truthful with myself about the things that have happened to me, and I pinpointed it, I realized that I needed to be that protector for me. So my older self needed to meet my younger self just to let him know that he was okay, and to thank him for not giving up. Now, once I'd done that, I realized that there was a lot of hugging that needed to happen with my younger self, a lot of crying that needed to happen.
Yeah.
And once I did that, the kid began to grow up, and I began to walk with him to the next stage where everything really changed again, where I got involved in the games, and I got involved with dealing dope, and I got involved with street fights and all of these crazy things, and going to prison. And the choices that I've made, I had to hold myself accountable. And then I had to forgive myself. And then I realized that grief had been following me that whole time, teaching me. I just didn't understand the lessons until I was able to really, when I was really broken down and felt like I needed to give up.
It's interesting that you should bring up that idea of the man and the child within. I mean, I don't necessarily, there's all this stuff about the magical child and the this and that, and books about that. And I was seeing a therapist a long time ago who that was her thing about everybody who comes into this room for therapy brings an injured child. And I thought, okay, I'm willing to, like when you go to a movie or you go to the theater or you go to a concert, you suspend disbelief. It's not that I believe that this is happening in front of me, or I don't believe. I'll just listen.
Right.
So I listened to her. All right, okay, you've got a child within, and I kept trying to think about that. It wasn't like I wanted to believe it or I don't want to believe it. I am who I am. I'm here as old as I am, And yes, I was a child. Is there a child within me? I don't know. But I was walking home from a session with her, and it was dark outside, and I remembered a photograph that my aunt had taken of me
Mhm.
uh, just about 3 months after my brother and my father died, and I was orphaned. I didn't have a mother, brother, or father. I was living with my stepmother, was drinking, didn't like her much. Fortunately, I had an aunt who was a special ed teacher in the Chicago public schools, who came to my house and said, "Get this boy into therapy." So I was seeing at age 14,
Okay.
seeing a guy who sat there smoking his Salem cigarettes and all the way down to the filter and going, "Listen to me." And yeah, he was listening. Oh, yeah, yeah. At least he was listening, and I
Yeah.
could tell my story. That was helpful. But so this is a black and white photograph I still have. Like I said earlier, I was into radio. I loved radio. I used to pretend tonight it's 75 degrees, going up to a high of 120 tomorrow. Um, and uh, my aunt said, "Well, what do you want?" I was visiting her in Chicago. "What do you want to do?" "Well, let's go out to the Night Corporation that I used to, get stuff from in the mail for my radio station. I was 12 years old, and I'm 14, and I'm wearing a raincoat, and I have a little bag outside of Night Kid Radio, and I bought some wire or something. She, paid for it for me. And she took this picture. I said, do you want me to take a picture of you outside, Night Kid?" I said, "Yeah, sure." And then she got it developed and gave me the picture. And I still have this. This is, a long time ago. And as I was walking home by myself, and it was a winter time, so it was dark out and nobody was going to see me, I suddenly remembered this photograph of me, and I remembered how serious I looked. I wasn't smiling. I didn't feel like smiling. My world had ended. And I wasn't a grown up. 14-year-old, can you defend yourself? Yeah, maybe against 14-year-olds, maybe a 15-year-old. But, and I remember this photograph, and I had almost this vision. I'm going to throw my arms around this 14-year-old boy who is me, who is sad, who's had a lot of it, if not all of it, taken away. And I'm just gonna put my arms around him and I'm gonna comfort him. And I had never had that thought in my life. And fortunately, it was dark outside, or people would have thought I was crazy. I just started sobbing as I'm walking. I just started crying to
Yeah.
myself. And it was a deeply relieving. I felt so good doing
Yes.
that. Nobody
Yes.
was watching. I wasn't doing it for anybody else. And I literally, I patted my own shoulder. And I don't know what I said to myself. I don't know what I said, but all I know is the picture in my mind of me putting my arms around this 14-year-old kid and saying, I'm going to take care of you.
Yeah. Exactly.
I'm more capable now than you were then, than I
Exactly.
was then. Even though that bifurcation, dividing yourself in
Mhm.
parts like that, is a little strange. I still
Yeah,
don't quite
yeah, it
get it.
is. It is very strange because who thinks like that, right?
Right.
But now, here's the thing. It's like an engineer. You couldn't put me in a situation to be an engineer. It's not my thing. That man is good at what he does. He sits in his element. That's his gift. I respect that gift. I know where my lane is. I never figured it out until it began to manifest itself, right? And once I figured it out, I knew what I was supposed to do from that moment on. And this vision that kept in my head. And I just know still to this day, that's where I'm supposed to go. No matter where the road leads me or what it teaches me, I know everything that it's teaching me is helping me to grow. So I know that in certain elements, I'm a lot better, right, than most. I'm self-taught, but I'm not special. These are things that just make sense to me.
What's most interesting about this is that what you're just talking about, getting that lesson from yourself and
Huh?
following that voice in yourself. This is how I'm just going to do this. I can survive, and I will, and I am. That you're sort of alone in that.
I
I
am.
mean, I mean,
Yes.
in a way, completely alone.
Yes.
I mean, even with the closest, even with your partner in a marriage, the one you love the most, or your closest friend, or your closest, or an auntie or an uncle, you can say it, and maybe they can nod and go, that's great, oh, good for you, oh, that's wonderful, but you're still completely alone in it until you do something like what you have done, and what I do as well with
Exactly.
friends that I'm sharing poetry with and so on, and talking about these issues. But only, I've had fantasies about putting ads like on Craigslist. If you've lost both your mother and father when you were a child, please, blah, blah, blah. And I haven't
Yeah.
done it because I realized that everybody's life is different. I may end up with people whose parents were so abusive and terrible that
It's part of
that their pain is really not about having
it.
lost anybody. Their pain was about what happened when they were, tiny little kids.
Yeah.
And but with people like yourself who've made the decision about your own pain and loss,
Mhm.
and made a decision to not only share it but to organize around it, and to become the leader of the group for that purpose,
I'm a
then you're
servant.
suddenly not alone.
Yeah,
Then
I'm a
you're not alone.
servant. That's what my role is. I'm a servant. I'm not trying to lead anybody. People are more than capable of leading themselves.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, Sometimes they just need people to inspire them, to to get them to step in the right direction.
yeah.
I'm just here to serve. I don't want anything from anyone. I don't need anything from anyone, and I don't want them to think that what I give has expectations attached to it.
Right, as a
Right,
guru.
right.
Yeah, yeah,
You know what I'm saying? Like I'm just me.
right.
I've been walking this path alone for a very long time.
I remember
Um,
when I was about 19 years old, and things had really, I'd flunked out of college, and just things were, and I was into drugs and so on. Things were just really not so great. Um, I picked up a couple of things about Buddhism and this and that and
mhm,
theosophy, and kind of, searching around. But the one thing that I remember that was universal about all that sort of crazy and interesting stuff was a phrase that I kept reading over and over. When you step upon the path, your teacher will come.
right.
And I
Yes.
thought, teacher, do I need a teacher? Do I need a guru? No, I never joined. That was just not my thing. But I realized it could be a girlfriend. It could be a kid. I was walking through a grocery store, and a mother and her little 4-year-old son, and he looked at me, and I'm by myself, and I was probably stoned. And this kid stops and he looks at me and he goes, "Where's your mommy?" and I didn't want to say, well, she died when I was 7 years old. I just, well, she's not here. I'm a big grown-up man. I'm looking for some breakfast cereal. And we had a laugh, and that was the end of it. But I never forgot that this kid, maybe in my imagination, but he picked up on something. He needed to ask me, where's your mommy? And
Right.
that 4-year-old, me as a 22-year-old, that 4-year-old became my teacher in that moment.
Yes.
So that idea is still with me. When you step upon the path, literally, like step over a curb, step over a series of cacti, or over the thorn bush onto the
Mhm.
path, your teacher will come, whether it's a 4-year-old kid, or whether it's in the form of a book. I remember picking up Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer when I was 17, and he was such an adventurous and just wild and crazy guy, and full of love and excitement, and had been through a lot of rough stuff as a kid. And I thought, if this guy, I remember putting the book down and going, if this guy can do this to my brain, which was put me in a whole new world, I someday want to play in that arena. I
Exactly.
want to be able to do that for
Yeah.
somebody else. So the book, I never met Henry Miller, seen him on videos, but the book became my teacher. So that still is in my head. Every time somebody says, "Oh, maybe you want to do this workshop, this guy's a poet, and he's really interesting," and I don't have time. Well, I'll do it. Something always happens.
Yeah.
Stepped upon the
Exactly.
path, and my teacher with a funny face or an old face or a kid face or a woman's face pops up for a day or a night or a moment or a week
Mm-hmm.
or inside of the covers of a book, and I am farther down the path.
You know, that is, I love that you said that, you know, the teacher pops up. You know, I pretty much grief has been my teacher. After I learned how to sit with it though, once I learned how to sit in deep inside of my grief, I remembered that, you know, the world would just disappear and all of these things would start making sense to me. So my grief, you know, grief has been my teacher this whole entire time. But now I did have other teachers, like the people who wasn't good for me.
Yeah.
You know, the people who wasn't good for my mental health. Now, I never knew anything about this at all, you know, mental health, because here I am, a poor kid, right? You know, I grew up with nothing, lost everything. And it was just like, how am I going to do this? But yet everything is working itself out. So when grief started teaching me, it also started teaching me the other side, like, you know, saying you got to be careful how you take the things that people say to you, right? And so I couldn't take things personal. Once I started to understand, you don't mean anything by it. I get that. But then it was the girlfriends that used to say things, and now I talk about them, and it was like, whoa, what do you mean? So expectations, all of these other things that that grief wasn't showing me. I had these other teachers, but also there was another side. Like I didn't have a lot of money, so but I know I needed mentors, you know, to help understand and make sense of my life. So what I did, what I used to do, and this is crazy, but I used to listen to motivationals. I used to
Yeah,
listen
yeah,
to
me
people's
too. Me
speeches,
too.
yeah, you know, and
Napoleon Hill, Dale Carnegie.
yeah, yes, yes, all of them. I used to like, man, and I would listen to them. They would sound like as if they were talking to me. So
Right,
I was a perfect student. You could not get me away from those motivationals. I would talk,
right.
and I was just, whoa. And then I think about my life, and it's like, hey, does that make sense now? Yes. Okay, what's the next step? Because I always looked at their life.
Yeah.
They were successful. They had been known. I'm an introvert. So I'm like, okay, I have to get outside of my comfort zone. Whoa, what are you talking about? You mean I got to talk to people? Like, yeah. And then all of a sudden, I did my first podcast. I was interviewed because somebody saw my nonprofit and was like, you got to tell me about this thing. I've never changed anything. This is what I'm called to do, and this is what I'm going to do to the best of my ability. And then I'm go back and listen to more and just put all of these things together. And then I was like, okay, I need to change some things because I have to get financially stable. So, okay, how do I do that? No one's ever taught me these things. So I started listening and paying attention. Oh, you have to do this and you have to do this. Well, how do I do this right here? I'm going to go to another YouTube channel.
Right,
And
right,
so I
right.
taught myself all of these things. And at the same time, we talk about holding space. I never knew what holding space was or being mindful and showing up with people. It was instinctively.
You know, you said something a minute ago about grief itself,
Mm-hmm.
and what it made me think of is that, and you know, which of course is that's why you and I are talking. I mean, that's part of your mission, and certainly mine,
Yeah.
and that's why we're here chatting. And one of one of the hardest things is the grief itself inside of a man, inside of a person.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, is tough, mercurial, ever changing stuff,
Right. Yes.
and dealing with it, it lingers,
Mm-hmm.
and when you deal with it, when you have a good cry, when you have, whether it's by yourself or whether it's a friend or whether
Mm-hmm.
it's with a partner or a therapist or whoever, and you feel better and suddenly an insights come. There's also, you know, a more difficult side.
Oh
A
yeah.
couple of hours later, it's like you're
Mm-hmm.
ticked off at people, and how come I
Oh yeah.
talked to her, and what, you know, how come I'm freaking, how come I'm fantasizing, you know, clocking that guy in the head.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
that's the tough part, and it's not explained. I mean, we just don't come with instruction manuals about grief.
We don't.
And I don't think the mental health industry, or certainly the insurance
No.
industry, you know, people try, they got a job, maybe they can get a few sessions, you know,
Mm-hmm.
a therapist. Um, I'm I'm writing a memoir, and I've gotten a couple of things published about grief, a bunch of grief poems and some short stories, and did some. I did a couple pieces in the Hollywood Fringe. One's called "Voices in My Head." I don't have voices in my head, but I just call it about losing everybody. And there would be days I'd feel so good about the writing and so good about something. I got 35 pages and I'm working this out with friends. I got a director and I'm going to be in the Hollywood Fringe, baby. I got a theater booked and I put a couple $100 down but why am I standing in the backyard feeling like either shooting somebody or crying my eyes out, but I can't cry?
Yeah.
What's going on? And that's the I mean, I don't have to tell you about that. That's the one of the more interesting things, and the sort of the thing that I have to keep remembering about grief
Right.
is that to deal with it and to talk openly about it and to gather around the issue of opening up to it, which
Hmm.
is so healthful and can feel so good. Um, there are also the shadows
Right.
that linger,
Oh yeah.
that lessen and lessen, but I don't think they ever quite go away.
No.
And that's what I was reminded of when you talked just a moment about you said grief and you paused about the phenomenon itself,
Right.
and then
Everybody
there's
has their own different interpretation of it.
yeah.
So aside from doing all of that, I just started a grief panel. We just did one Saturday, our first ever one, and it's called Grief. Let's Talk About It. And that's part of the things that we talked about was the grieving process and how everyone is going to interpret it in a different way.
Yeah.
Right? That's what's so beautiful and amazing about grief. Not everybody grieves the same. Not everybody is individual.
Right.
So you can personalize your grief. Your grief fits you. You just have to understand where it fits and understand that everything that comes along with it, every thought that comes along with it is totally normal. It's going to take you to a place to where you eventually you have less frequent episodes.
Yeah.
And then once that starts, now we can start the healing. So grieving and healing is two different things. You will grieve for as long as you need to. Most people like to rush it. They rush the process. And what ends up happening is that they get stuck. And then their grieving process takes a nasty turn and it looks differently.
You know the great actor James Earl Jones,
Yes.
the voice of Darth Vader, and well,
Yes.
he's one of America's greatest
Oh, I
actors.
still love his voice, man.
He was a patient of a therapist in Los Angeles named Arthur Janoff, who wrote a book called The Primal Scream.
Yes.
And James Earl Jones, at the height of his career, I don't know what was going on in his personal life, but thought, I'm going to do this therapy. And the therapy, the way what this therapist discovered is a traditional psychologist with a PhD, and he had a group. And in this group, some young kid, this is before James Earl Jones was a patient, some young kid suddenly started sobbing and crying in the group. And people in the group got very upset. He looked like he was having a nervous breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
And his kid about 25 years old. And Janoff, the therapist, said, just let him go, let him go. And somebody said, but he's having a nervous breakdown. Stop him, stop him, stop him. And people in the group were very upset. And he goes, he wrote in his book, Janoff wrote in his book, he said, I had this hunch that if I just let this kid go all the way with his grief, not stop him,
Mm-hmm.
it looks like he's having a complete psychotic nervous breakdown, he's safe. He's in a soundproof room, surrounded by people who are not going to be talking about him. We're in a circle of chairs.
Mm-hmm.
He's on the floor and on the deep pile carpeting. He's not going to hurt himself. And the kid cried and he screamed and he cried and he screamed and he pounded and he cursed and so on. After about maybe a long stretch of time, could have been 4 or 5 minutes, where people were convinced this guy's gone psychotic.
Right.
He stopped and he sat up. And the therapist, Janoff, said, so tell me about that. And the kid came up with sort of this stream of insights about his life and his discomfort and his
Mm-hmm.
mother, his parents, blah, blah, blah. And so this guy went on to sort of create a whole theory about people just need to cry it out,
Yeah.
need to be in a safe situation, need to cry it out, and not just talk about it, or not just get a guru and to tell you what to do.
Right.
And eventually James Earl Jones became a patient of this guy, and he was so emotionally open anyway as an actor that I think he was attracted to this. And all it did was it just made him a better actor, and I'm assuming it made him a happier man.
Yes.
And he was so into it, because he was a successful guy. He had a home in Bel Air and a big garage, but he had a carpenter build him a soundproof box,
Yeah.
comfortable, so that he could go in there when he was feeling bad and just scream and cry and pound pillows and not have anybody hear it. But it was so big that he had to park his Mercedes on the street. This is a true story. You can Google James Earl Jones primal therapy.
Oh my
I
God.
thought I
You got
thought
a
this
party on
man
the
who,
street.
because he's in the voiceover industry, he and I have the same agent. I
Yeah.
actually saw him auditioning for Doritos once. He was just such a nice man, such a sweet, sweet man. I said something like, Mr. Jones, I just saw you and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof in New York live. And oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. We had a blah, blah, blah. And we had a 2-second conversation, but he was,
Mm.
he was a cordial, sweet guy. But because, he's my hero, right? Verizon and the voice of Darth Vader, let alone everything else.
I love your
Yeah.
voice. I
Yeah.
love your voice. I'm just like, oh my God,
But to
this
read
is
about
really
what
cool.
he
This
did
is
at the
amazing.
height of his career in his life, what he did was he thought, I just need to cry this stuff out. And I'm going to build myself a box in my garage and park my Mercedes on the street. True story.
I totally agree. And then I've talked to women about it too, because they're always curious about how men grieve. I tell them, I was like, they really don't grieve any less different than what you do. It just looks different.
Yeah.
Right? And they go, well, when I try to talk to my significant other or my partner or anything like that, they kind of shut down and shy away and things like that. I said, well, how are you approaching them? And then when they told me, I said, okay, back up a little bit. You're expecting him to be somewhere where he isn't. And instead of giving him the space that he needs to go and process, and like you said, cry it out,
Yeah.
right? Because that's what he's needing right now, because you're not giving him what he needs, because you've already put expectations, which is now telling him to suppress what he's going through. So initially he's going to push you away. So instead of doing that, allow him to walk off and scream and shout and let him do it.
And that's, speaking of being alone, it's hard for other people to understand.
It
If
is.
honey, I'm going to go downstairs for a minute. What are you going to do? I still have one friend who I met when I was doing therapy years and years ago. And he and I are good friends. And, we're both married to different women. And he and I have lunch every 3-4 months, but also every 3-4 months, we go down into my voiceover studio. I got a 7-by-7 foot plywood box with foam rubber in it, because that's where I go tonight, then blah, blah, blah. And we will still, I sit on a stool, who goes first? All right, I'll go first. Okay, I'll sit on a stool and shut up and say nothing. I'm not a therapist. And he'll lie down with a pillow and he'll just start going, well, I was talking to my wife about this and this, and I tried to sell this screenplay and blah, blah, blah. And he's going, using up all my Kleenex. That's my only objection. He goes through dollars. and, I mean, literally, this guy 40 years ago, he had an old Plymouth, a big old Plymouth sedan, huge old used car. And we were going to Denny's or something for, to get something to eat. And I looked in the back seat, and the whole, not only the back seat, but the floor was covered in Kleenex. It was almost as high as the front seat. I said, Sam, you got to clean your car. What is all this in your back car, in the back of your seat? He says, well, I'm living with this woman, and she doesn't like it. And she didn't understand when I scream and cry. So I drive around and cry.
That makes, why is it that men do that? Like we rather go and sit by ourselves and process it instead of really following our instincts, which is telling us that we need to connect with others, right?
It's
Um,
it's the fear once again that
being judged.
you're gonna be misunderstood and you're gonna be judged as being
Yeah.
weak.
Yeah, I know it was. I'm always curious, right? Because I do run across men who don't want anything to do with it, but they'd rather talk to me in private.
Right. Yeah.
And then I have some men that are just like, you got the group going on. I want to let me know when the next one. I would love to be there, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm always curious because I'm always encouraging the men. Now I do respect their space. I do. So if that's what they need to do, if they just want to sit with me on a one-on-one and not say anything, cry it out, maybe just look out at the sun or maybe go to a lake or something like that, because we do that, right? And just sit out there where it's comfortable.
Yeah.
And I asked them, I go, what's going on? Would you like to be in a group? And they often say, I'm not about that group thing, man. I'm not. I just look at them and go, okay, you know, I'm just psychologically, I just try to make sense out of it, which I do for the most part, but everyone's different, you know. So I try to find that baseline, that the commonality that they share.
Well, I mean, we've all witnessed sometimes,
Right.
in a restaurant or on the street or in a park, where a little kid, tiny little kid, is crying. Shut up! Quit your crying!
Mm-hmm.
And that probably goes on in their life every single day, hour after hour. Anytime that kid, and kids, that's just naturally, they just don't know how to, they're uncomfortable for whatever reason. They're
Right.
going to be screaming, for years of the parent's life.
Yeah.
A lot of parents just can't take it. And so those moments of humiliation and punishment for expressing your feelings as a child, as a toddler, as a 3-year-old,
Makes
4-year
sense.
old, 5-year old, 6-year-old, years and years and years of that, you're to the world has taught you, just shut the hell up, man up.
That's yeah, you know, and that's why I said I think about it all the time, even though the answer is different. I like to hear other people's opinion about it. Because it's usually pretty interesting. Some people will say, well, you know, this is stemming from this right there. And I think the same way that you do. A lot of it comes from when you are a child and you're being neglected, or you're being told to neglect certain things. You know, like you said, we've all been there. We start crying. Boy, don't you shut up. I mean, don't you
Right,
start
right,
crying. I'll
right.
give you something to cry for. So
Yeah.
automatically we go, yeah, we're not going to do that, because in our mind as young men, at least for me, my mother, she was the one that you didn't want to, you just didn't talk back to her. She beat you up,
Right. Yeah.
you know, but she meant well. She was a loving mother, you know. But like I always tell people, she was a little heavy handed, and I think there were some occasions where we forgot that I'm still a child. You just can't
Yep.
beat on me like that, right? But I can't fault her for what she did, or you know what I'm saying, the situations or anything like that. She can only do with what she knew.
One of the biggest regrets I have as a parent, I have a daughter who's 35 years old, and
Mm,
just gave me a grandson, and is married and has a career and so on. But um, my biggest regret is that I didn't get. There were just too many times when I was put off
mm.
by her. It wasn't her crying or being sad. It was stubbornness. It was stubbornness.
Okay.
And she's a stubborn little girl, and she, and then the kids are going to challenge their parents.
Of course, that's a
And
definite.
my thing was, well, don't, well, but I'm maybe, I don't know if it's because my parents died when I was a kid and I didn't have a role model. I have no idea.
Right.
But in my head, I'm going, well, wait a minute. Aren't I the authority here? Shouldn't I be able to say, shut the hell up? Shouldn't she learn to shut the hell up? And so there were just way too many times when I should have said, sweetie, what you're saying to me is just making me. I don't want to get angry, and I'm just gonna. You can just go to your room. I'm going downstairs.
Right.
Instead of losing it, I never got physical. I never hit her, never slapped her, never, none of that. But I got verbal, And because part of me thought, well, shouldn't I draw the line here? Aren't they supposed to shut up when you tell them to shut up?
Mm-hmm.
And I have deep regrets because you can't undo that. And I'm really lucky that, and then she and I did some therapy. We did some therapy together, and that helped. But she, as a result, she doesn't trust me completely. And
That's
and
understandable.
we have a relationship and so on, but that's the biggest regret that I have in my life, is that I didn't get it. That as a man, you can have all your pride and you can have your manhood and your masculinity, and you are a big daddy, but you can still say, you know what, sweetie, the way you're behaving is just making me mad, and you just go to your room, and I'm gonna go downstairs and read a book, or I'm gonna call it. I'm sorry, and cut it off, instead of, don't you talk to me, that don't you know, you're 7 years old, you should know, blah 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 blah. I really look back, and I know that put has put a permanent, if not complete, uh, sort of cloud, somewhat of a subtle cloud over what otherwise could have been a much happier relationship
Right.
with my own child,
Right. And
who's a
see,
big grown up
I
girl
don't
now.
have that experience. I do have two older girls though. My oldest daughter, she's 30, almost a little over 30. Um, but now I say that to say this, I have no regrets for the choices that I had to make in my life. So I never got the chance to be her father because my life did not permit me to. So I never got the chance to see her grow up or anything like that. My youngest daughter, I raised her till she was 2, and she was taken away from me from a situation that I had no control over. And so that was the last time I had the chance to be around any of them. And the last time with my son, I didn't do too bad. I didn't have a whole lot of role models, but we did butt heads on a few occasions. And then eventually, once I learned how to parent him, or be once I'm not going, I hate that word. Once I learned how to be his father, and learn how to be a better man myself, so we had to work together, I never had a problem out of him. It was like, I get you now. Once I understood he and I had the same sort of disorder, it was like, okay, I get you now. Okay, instead of me getting mad, I'm gonna show you something that's going to help you. And so my Bubba he was my road dog. He was everything that I was or couldn't be, and he was going to be so much more than what I ever could imagine.
Yeah.
And that was my job. So I couldn't speak from that, and I have no regrets for making the choices that I did, because they grew up a lot better, but without me than with
And
me.
the old adage, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You can.
Yeah, you can.
I mean,
You
I mean,
can.
I just was told by a friend of mine who's a therapist. I said, I'm just still so impatient with my wife. I mean, I adore her, blah blah blah, but she'll forget something else. Sweetie, we just talked about that 5 minutes ago. And she said to me, she said, well, so she does a lot for you, right? And I said, yeah, I mean, she's a fabulous cook. She cooks me dinner every single night, like a gourmet meal every night. She's my lover. She's a sweet natured woman. And she said, well, she does a lot for you, right? And supports you. And I said, yeah. And she said, well, maybe you could do that for her. So what do you mean? Well, when she needs you, I don't know how to send this in my email. I forgot. Are we doing something Friday night? You can say, okay, honey, yeah, well, yeah, we are. It's on my calendar. Or, yeah, I'll help you. Instead of, I showed that to you last week, which is my MO. And I actually have been practicing this. And I said to my friend, I said, I wish I'd learned this 25 years ago. And she said, well, you probably wouldn't have been able to hear it.
I
That if I
love
could
that.
just see it like that I can't correct, I can't change my wife.
Mm-mm.
She's not going to remember every damn thing that I have said. Yeah, Friday night we're going to, or you just press the thing attachment, and that's been a big. Another one was we're going to share a cabin with the in-laws in my family, who I like, but I thought, I'm going to get what if I get like depressed and just ticked off at these people? And she said, well, just pretend you're the big daddy and just tell them what a great time you're having. You're the big daddy. I said, no. And as opposed to the grousing,
Right.
grumpy
Yeah. Yeah.
guy.
You're just
And so
changing
every
some
time,
words around.
right. So every time it got a little too close in there, I go, I'm the big daddy. I'm the big daddy. I'm the big generous daddy, big smile on my face. I got to be here forever. You got 2 more days. It
I
worked.
love it. I love it. Oh my God,
So,
man.
I mean, for me, the lesson is an old dog can learn new
They
tricks.
can, and it takes people like us that understand that can reach them, right? First and foremost, know how to talk to them in their language, because we are talking to men, right? And we as men, we love to have fun. We love to laugh. We love to hear other men talk like men.
Yeah.
But also, when you can add a little something in there to kind of, what I'm saying, open up the door for that conversation to happen. You ever notice when you do that and you're around other men like that, they tend to talk like that?
Yes. Yeah. And because I always get very impatient. I always end up being the interviewer,
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes. And there are really not that many people in my life, or maybe in our lives, who are just as interested in you as you are in them.
And
And will
yes,
tell you, will say
yeah,
after they've talked for 10 minutes, and we'll turn around and say, so tell me about you. But because that's a gift, I think some of us have it, some of us don't. And
this
and
is true. Well, you know what? Most people don't know until they do it. People live in fear. I do. I know. I did too. I did too. I would never been podcasting because, again, the introvert in me don't want to be known.
Yeah.
It doesn't want to be known. But the introvert to me wants to go and hide in a corner somewhere where no one can reach me.
Right.
Right. And I'm perfectly fine right there. I am perfectly fine sitting in the corner and not being noticed. Now, the other side of me, the passion side of me, says, no, we have to do this because this is the only way that we know how to do this.
Yep.
So get up, learn how to use your voice, and let's go talk to some people. The worst thing that can happen is that they tell you no.
Something else that occurred to me just a minute ago when you were talking is you're talking about your kids, and
Yeah.
you said I was unable to be a father after a certain point because of circumstances. And uh, my parents were unable to be parents because they were dead. But I look back and I go, so who was out there? There were a couple of uncles.
Mm-hmm.
No, there were three of them. Two of them were alcoholics. But one
These
of
things
them,
happen.
one of them was not. One of them, my dad's little brother, who lived, 800 miles away, had a big influence on my life.
Mm.
Didn't raise me. I only spent weeks of my life, weeks of my entire life, not years, but just weeks, 5 days here, 4 days here, once a week, once a summer. But that man had an influence on me. He didn't really try to teach me anything so much.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one time he tried to teach me about women when I was 14 years old. Well, you got to understand that they have part of me was like,
Don't
stop.
do it. Don't do it.
I already know. Okay. But it was his example, just his kindness
Right.
was an example to me, and the way he talked to me, and the way he would just put his arm on his hand on my shoulder and say, "Hey, I'm going to take you downtown. We're going to go to work and we'll go get a hamburger," and just the kindness and just the love, even though he didn't raise me, and even the two guys who loved their Kentucky Tavern bourbon,
Mm.
they
Hey,
were
I get it, man.
they
I
were
do.
they were good guys, at times, and they had some joy in their lives, and just just having known them, just their company.
Yeah.
One of them actually was an actor. He was in I Love Lucy. My Uncle Bobby played Bobby the Bellboy on I Love Lucy.
I
Mrs.
used to watch
Ricardo,
that too.
Mrs. Ricardo is Bobby the Bellboy. Listen, if you'd open the hotel room door, I've got your beautiful ballroom gown. I got dry clean for you and a couple pairs of Ricky's socks and I think some of his underwear. Oh, thanks, Bobby. That was my uncle, Bobby the Bellboy. And
That is amazing.
my parents would never, when they were alive, would never let me and my brother go out to California to meet him. They said, well, how come? He's not such a good driver. I don't think you want to be with him. And so when I was growing up, I wanted to look him up. It's Bobby the Bellboy. I got to get to know this guy. And he was a very bitter, guy. He had like a half pint of bourbon hidden always in the back of his wheelchair in a little Velcro bag. And at 11 in the morning, his wife would go to work and he'd hear the Velcro and he'd pull out the bottle and take that and he'd go, you want a little something to drink? Bobby, it's 11 in the morning. But still,
somewhere,
I still thank this guy in my dreams for being not because he was Bobby the Bellboy, but because he told me stories and he liked me. He liked suddenly realizing he had a nephew. And so these people in our lives might be part of the reason why we end up surviving.
They are. I mean, I totally agree. Everyone I've ever encountered in every stage of my life has taught me how to survive in one way or another, right? Whether if it was positive or negative. When you're out there on the streets, you don't have too many role models, and the role models that you do know how to survive on the streets.
Yeah.
So you pay attention, right? You want to know how they move, but when they make a mistake, you also want to pay attention to the mistake that they made so you don't make that same mistake.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't always happen that way. You eventually make a mistake. That's how we all get caught, right? But and then, as you move through it depends on where you are.
Yeah.
In your life. It just depends. Now, I've had lessons in being an alcoholic from experienced alcoholics, but then figured out that I wanted to be a better alcoholic than them. Right. So I learned how to drink a lot better, right? Hold my alcohol, learn how to, keep my composure when I'm 2 cases in and a half a bottle of tequila. And I'm still looking at you going, so how are you doing? And they're looking at me like, how are you still talking? I'm like, well, I don't know. But see, the key to it is don't stand up. You can talk and still be civil. Just don't stand up, because now you're going to realize how drunk you really are.
When I was still doing drugs and drinking, I was walking past a liquor store in the middle of the morning, and a big, tall guy with a beautiful fedora hat and a long, beautiful green leather coat walked very elegantly out of the liquor store with something under his arm, walked to the curb and puked. But he didn't like bend over like most people do. He just sort of blew it out his mouth and turned around and got in his car. And I thought, that was it. So I was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania with a friend, and we were doing this. Another actor guy. We were doing this seminar for a bunch of advertising people, and they took us out to dinner and took us to an Italian restaurant that had a single malt Scotch menu in an Italian restaurant. I don't know where they got that. And so they just got us drunk, and I got so drunk and so much pasta. And I just shut up. You okay? Yeah, no, I'm fine. And I walked toward speaking of being the right kind of drunk. Everybody, they paid the bill, they bought us dinner. I walked ahead of them out to the curb, and I remembered that guy in that beautiful green leather coat. I just stood straight and tall and just blew lunch and turned around and said, "You okay?" "Yeah, I'm just fine." Took out my handkerchief.
Oh my God. That is hilarious, man. That is hilarious.
On that note, I am leaving my grandchild and my beautiful niece and my second cousin and someone all sitting at brunch. I got to join them for brunch. But this has been more of a pleasure than I imagined.
Yes,
your work and this podcast has just been an opportunity for me to talk about stuff that's so real for me. I really appreciate it.
I enjoy you being up here, and we definitely would have to do it again whenever you have time. Just let me know. I would love to have you on.
What is your can I go online and find the podcast?
Yeah, go to YouTube, Memories of Us podcast, and it should pop up. You'll see my ugly face up there.
Memories of Us.
Memories of Us podcast. So yeah, you got to
Going
put
there.
the
YouTube
podcast in
Memories
there.
of Us
Yeah.
podcast. I'm going there, and I can't wait to hear you and me say the truth of the ages.
Oh man, I'm so looking forward to this episode coming out. People would never believe, but I was talking to the guy who did G.I. Joe Flint. They're going to be like, what? I don't know, but it was fun. We had a blast, and so
Good.
I would like to do it again if ever you have time.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
yeah,
I'm here. I'll
right.
do it in a second.
All right. Well, like I said, thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and close this off. Give me a few seconds. So everybody, I hope you guys are enjoying this, and I'm glad that you guys tuned in for another episode of Memories of Us. And you guys keep your head up, stay safe, and have fun. And just remember, man, going through the grieving process is hard. Take your time. Take your time and be patient with yourself. And until the next time, I love you. You guys keep your head up.